"Well, well," said the old gentleman, "I will consent for this year, and this year only. I have been a churchwarden of this parish for between 4 and 20 years, and we have always given the harvest festival collection to the hospital, and although under these exceptional circumstances it may possibly be desirable to diverge from that custom, I cannot and I will not consent to such a thing in a permanent way. So I shall write to the secretary and explain the matter, and tell him that next year and in the future generally the collection will be devoted to its original purpose." "Good heavens!" ejaculated Mr. Quest to himself, "and all the time the man must know that in all human probability the place will be sold over his head before he is a year older. I wonder if he puts it on or if he deceives himself. I suppose he has lived here so long that he cannot realise a condition of things when he will cease to live here, and the place will belong to somebody else, or perhaps he is only brazening it out." And then he strolled away to the back of the house and had a look at the condition of the outhouses, reflecting that some of them would be sadly expensive to repair for whoever came into possession here. After that he crossed the moat and walked through the somewhat extensive plantations at the back of the house, wondering if it would not be possible to get enough timber out of them, if one went to work judiciously, to pay for putting the place in order. Presently he came to a spot where there had been a line of very fine timber oaks in a hedgerow, of which the Squire had been notoriously fond, and of which he had himself taken particular and admiring notice in the course of the previous winter. The trees were gone. In the hedge where they had stood were a series of gaps like those in an old woman's jaw, and about upon the ground were littered remains of bark and branches and of faggots that had been made up of the brushwood. "Cut down this spring fell," was Mr. Quest's ejaculation. "Poor old fellow, he must have been pinched before he consented to part with those old oaks." Then he turned and went back to the house, just in time to see Ida's guests arriving for the lawn tennis party. Ida herself was standing on the lawn behind the house, which bordered as it was by the moat and the further end by a row of ruined arches, was one of the most picturesque in the country and a most effective setting to any young lady. As the people came they were shown through the house on the lawn, and here she was receiving. She was dressed in a plain, tight-fitting gown of blue flannel, which showed off her perfect figure to great advantage, and a broad-brimmed hat which shaded her fine but somewhat dignified face. Mr. Quest sat down on a bench beneath the shade of an arbutus, watching her closely, and indeed if the study of a perfect English lady of the noblest sort has any charms, he was not without his reward. There are some women, most of us know one or two, who are born to hold a great position and to sail across the world like a swan through meaner fowl. It would be hard to say to what their peculiar charm and dignity is owing. It is not to beauty only, for though they have presence, many of these women are not beautiful, while some are even plain. Better not, this face has been so often described in different and non-accordant terms. Nor does it spring from native grace and tact alone, though these things must be present. Rather is it the reflection of a cultivated mind acting upon a naturally pure and elevated temperament, which makes these ladies conspicuous above the level of their sex, and fashions them in such kind that all men look upon them, and putting aside the mere charm of beauty and the natural softening of judgment in the atmosphere of sex, must recognise in them an equal mind, and a presence more noble than their own. It was while Mr. Quest was still watching Ida with complete satisfaction, for she appealed to the artistic side of his nature, that Colonel Quaritch arrived upon the scene, looking, Mr. Quest thought, particularly plain in his solid form, his long thin nose, light whiskers, and square and massive chin. And he looked particularly imposing in contrast to the youths and maidens and domesticated clergymen. There was a gravity, almost a solemnity, about his bronze countenance, and deliberate, ordered conversation, which did not, however, favourably impress the aforesaid youths and maidens, if a judgment might be formed from such samples of conversational criticism which Mr. Quest heard going on on the further side of his arbutus. End of chapter 10.